George Bush, what's it like to be a Texan?
Well, I feel pretty lucky to be a Texan for starters. My folks moved to West Texas when I was 2 years old. I was born in my dad's sophomore year at Yale, and we moved to 2, and that's all I've known what it's be to be a Texan. I've been a Texan in Texas. I've also been a Texan outside of Texas, and I think there's two different feelings. Inside of Texas, it's a very comfortable feeling. People are great. There's a lot to do here. There's kind of I think a can-do spirit in Texas. Outside of Texas, you're kind of an anomaly. People always want to know what a Texan is like, and those of us who have been Texans outside of Texas, we have to restrain ourselves from not being too much of a Texan outside of Texas. But I love it. I mean, Texas is my life, or a big part of my life. I'm very proud of it, proud of the heritage that I've got here, and wouldn't trade it.
What have the last couple of years been like? We keep hearing that Dallas is in trouble and Houston's in trouble.
Well, for me personally, it's been unbelievably exciting. I'm doing something that I think everybody who's ever been to a baseball game would love to do, and that is be a part of baseball. It's a fabulous sport, so I've had a wonderful time. I think Texas is beginning to rebound. I think the psychological spirit is much higher here. I was in West Texas prior to moving to Dallas, and people there are still a little depressed because the oil industry busts. It's a one-horse town, really, which is oil. People haven't quite rebounded yet from the severe depression that we have been through out there. But in the big metropolitan cities, Houston and Dallas, I think the economies are rebounding. And most importantly, as a result of that, people are beginning to feel a lot better about themselves and about their future. And so much of the psychology of a society is hope. Is there hope? And I think a lot of people here feel that way. So Texas is a force to be reckoned with economically and politically. And there are some wonderful things on our horizon here in Texas. I think the free trade agreement with Mexico is going to make Texas an incredible place to do business.
Why?
Well, it's going to be the gateway of goods and services coming from Mexico. Mexico has got such incredible resources, untapped resources, labor, great pool of labor, and the need for capital. And as people discover the benefits of doing business in Mexico, and vice versa, Texas will become the gateway for all that trade. It'll mean cultural exchanges, it'll mean people exchanges, it'll mean big business opportunities. We're also fixing to build a super collider here, which will put the United States on the forefront of technological advancement. It's right south of Dallas, but it affects a giant area. So the combination of those two things, plus the natural resource base of Texas, agricultural and energy and high-tech business, makes Texas a great frontier and a horizon. And combine that with the entrepreneurial spirit, it's a place where young people who are interested in making a buck ought to come.
How'd you get into baseball?
Well, I kind of stumbled into it. It was right at the campaign, I think right after you and I talked. In 1988, a buddy of mine, Bill DeWitt, whose daddy used to own the Cincinnati Reds, called me and said he thought that the Texas Rangers were for sale. And I said, well, I happen to know the owner, a man I grew up with up around in Midland, Texas, an oil guy named Eddie Childs. I'm mad too, Eddie, and the real characters of Texas business, and a great guy. I called Eddie on the phone, and after the campaign I went to see him, and the team was for sale. And I was able to put together the group of capital to buy the club, most of it from Texas, here in Texas, and a lot of it from, some of it from outside the state, and bought it. But it was something I knew I wanted to do once I saw the opportunity was available. It meshes nicely with my life right now. It would mesh nicely with my life no matter what my life was like, by the way. But when your daddy is president of the United States, you're a public person, whether you want to be or not. And my job now is to sell tickets for the Texas Rangers. So in that I'm public, why not be public and do something useful, which is to get people to come and see the Rangers play.
We'll come back to baseball in a minute. How's your life changed since your father became president?
Well, since I last saw you, I'm more rested. I think I saw you right in the heat of combat, and I was exhausted probably, working on my just sheer energy. Untapped energy at that point in time. When you're on in a campaign, you really go on autopilot. It's like a marathon runner, mile 20 looking for mile 26 and just heading blindly toward the finish line. I've been able to relax pretty well, just personally. I think it matters that I'm 44 years old, 42 when he got elected. I had been through a lot in my life. I had some ups and downs, some business successes and some tough times, so that I wasn't trying to prove myself. I think if you try to prove yourself and your father's the president, if you have some axe to grind, you got a real problem. And I had worked through most of the axes I needed to grind prior to him getting elected, so I didn't feel any great competitive urge to try to show off or go on the wild side of things in order to find myself in the middle of the fishbowl existence. There have been some bad moments, bad press, not so much for me, but for other members of my family. I don't like it when the editorialists write personal things, or the cartoonists, the elitist cartoonists, write little, unfair characterizations of my dad. On the other hand, the good has been just tremendous. I mean, we get to go to Camp David with our little girls. Laura and I have 9-year-old twins. They go to the White House at Christmas. I can hear their pitter-patter of feet sneak down the stairs at 11 o'clock at night as they roam this huge hall. I'm sure even more gigantic for them, filled with trees and ornaments, sneaking around and really having a wonderful time. Then to go to Camp David with the President of the United States. We were playing volleyball one time, which is a volleyball game inside a handball court. My brothers and I were playing the Marine Corps, some of the Marine guys there. Dad comes up on the balcony and he stops the game. We all stop and look up at him. And he says, "Gentlemen, we have just captured Manuel Noriega." I mean, it was just history unfolding right before our eyes. And so the good has far outweighed the bad, Brian. It's been an interesting time.
What about things like Secret Service? They're around you all the time?
They are. They weren't initially, but they are now, as a result of the Colombian drug lords threatening lives, and then, of course, the Iraqi situation. But first of all, they're highly professional people. They're great men and women. I get along with them extremely well. And it's probably a bigger pain for them than it is for me. But they're a part of our lives, and we accept that. That's one of the things that happens to you when your father is President of the United States.
Does it go beyond you to the entire family?
You bet, yeah. Sure does. Everybody.
And is this more intense than it ever has been, as far as the family extended coverage?
No, I think, you mean in terms of other families?
Yeah.
No, I don't think so. I don't think so. I think it probably at times it's been more intense. But I think that, when you're at war, your country's at war, it gets very intense. And there was intense scrutiny, which was fine with me. You never know what nut is going to surface out there. And but I think this protection is the same protection that was offered Lyndon Johnson's kids, for example.
What did you think of the war?
I was really proud of the way George Bush ran it, for starters. I didn't have all the intelligence necessary to make the decision, but I was one of the 87% that supported him. The thing that made me most proud was, I remember I was a Vietnam-era guy. The president who set a goal and said to the military, "You go out and run the mission. My mission is not to second-guess you. My mission is to support you. Pick the best people you can." And he did with Cheney and Baker and Colin Powell and Norman Schwarzkopf, although he didn't pick Norman, but the military picked Norman. And said, "Fine, go get them. Unleash." And they did. And so I was very proud of the way he conducted himself in terms of the commander-in-chief, being the commander-in-chief. I was also really proud of the fact that he showed tremendous compassion. See, I think his popularity soared not only because we conducted the war well and won, but also because as the commander-in-chief, George Bush showed the human side of himself, which I've known for a long time, and that is he cared about the lives that were lost, cared about the people that were risking their life, and showed tremendous emotion at the appropriate time to share the grief with the American people. So I was very supportive of him and the war.
Did you find yourself getting tenser as that whole drama unfolded?
You bet. Yeah, I was pretty interested in it all. I of course was fairly hawkish. My attitude was, if you're going to draw the line, go get them. And He, of course, had much more intelligence than any American did, and he knew exactly what he was doing. But I can remember the anxiety as to whether or not we were going to go at all. There was a period of time when everybody was second-guessing, and whether is Bush going to move or is he not going to move? You know, what's he going to do? And I remembered all I had to do is hark back to my teenage years when he said simply, "George, if you do it again, you'll be in trouble." And of course, I did it again and was in trouble. And he's a man of his word, and I had momentarily forgotten that, evidently. And when he told Saddam Hussein that if on January 15th or whenever it was, if you don't move, we're in, lo and behold, he went. And there was anxious moments there. And of course, there was anxious moments after the attack began, praying that everything went well. And it was, the achievement went beyond everybody's wildest expectations. And that was, you know, we can thank God for that.
Have you or your father or your relationship changed at all since he's now president?
Not really. Changed more during the campaign, I think, for the good. I imagine you and I talked about this. I can't remember exactly, but during the campaign, as you know, I got to go to stand by his side as kind of a youthful warrior, and as he went off to political battles. I hate to keep using the war analogy, but I saw him in action, and he saw me in action, and I think he respected my judgment, my political sense. He carried some missions on for him, and I think I accomplished them like he'd hoped I would. Since then, he has been so busy that the only time I've been with him has been father-son time, as opposed to any kind of professional business time. And so our relationship is really the way it's been for a long time, and that is, you know, an admiring son to hopefully a respectful father. And
I can't remember whether I read this or whether you told me this in our last interview, that during the campaign you made something like 15 trips to Texas.
You bet.
And that you were toying with the idea of running for office, a governor.
Right, well.
Race. What happened?
Reality set in. I was making a living in the baseball business at the time, and I was having a great time about it. My family was not ready for me to run for governor. We'd just been through one campaign, and Barbara and Jenna and Laura just were ready to go through another one. We were a young family, and wasn't appropriate. I think my mother put it pretty well when she came down to Texas, and on the front page of every Texas newspaper she said, "Georgia, you better not run for governor." And her point was is that when your father's president of the United States, his actions and his deeds are going to perhaps influence the voters, or cloud the voters' vision, or influence them positively toward me. And she had a pretty good point. That's not the reason I didn't run. As I then quipped, Mother's been telling me what to do for 42 years, and I've listened to her once. But it just wasn't right. We fielded a very strong slate of candidates, the Republicans did, I thought. And my friend Clayton Williams, who got the nomination, got beat. He didn't run a very good campaign. He'd be the first to admit it, by Ann Richards. And so I don't view it as a lost opportunity. I just view it as not the right time for me to run. Am I still interested? You bet. I mean, I spend time all over our state working for the Republican Party and candidates. I went to Brownsville, Texas, to help raise money for the Cameron County Republican Party. This is deep in the heart of Democrat country. But also for my friend Tony Garza, who's a county judge in Brownsville, Texas, a young Hispanic leader who's got a tremendous future, but who needed help to raise money. And I just happened to be Nolan Ryan's boss and Barbara Bush's son, so I'm a fairly decent draw these days. And lo and behold, we raised him some pretty good cash.
Does it rule out then a chance to run in, what, 94?
No, it doesn't at all. My family's older, I'm older. George Bush will be at the end of his administration. We just have to take a look and see. Ann Richards, the verdict is still out on her. One doesn't want to go on any suicide missions. If she signs an income tax, she'll be in trouble in this state. We've never had an income tax. We don't need an income tax. And yet the lieutenant governor is pushing for an income tax, and she is yet to be heard on the issue. My judgment is that if she signs an income tax, she'll be through. And we'll see whether she can escape that or not. She also hadn't taken any lead on the education issue. And if she doesn't do that, she may be through as well. But she's had a pretty good first term in terms of not damaging herself. And she's got one more, I say term, we measure, there's 2 legislative sessions plus special sessions that our governor has to go through. She's been through one. She'll have a special session this summer, and then she'll have one more legislative term after the '92 elections. And then we'll make the call then.
You run for any office up to now?
Yes, I ran for the United States Congress, West Texas, and came in second, two-person field.
What year?
1978. Had a tough primary and won it by consolidating my home base of Midland County, Midland, Texas. We turned out a huge vote, whipped the guy who was from Odessa, which is the rival city, and then ran against now Republican Kent Hance, who was the conservative Democrat, popular in the district. Out-campaigned me, frankly. I raised probably more money than he did. But he was a better rural candidate than I was a better rural candidate. And since then we've become great friends, by the way. But he taught me some pretty good lessons about Texas rural politics. It's funny, after that campaign, I had a great experience. It was my first year of my marriage. So it was like kind of honeymooning on the campaign trail. Secondly, I really got to be a better person from losing, believe it or not. No one likes to lose. But I learned a lot about myself. There's nothing like a nice dose of humble pie at the age of 32 to maybe make you a better person.
What'd you learn about politics?
Well, I learned that campaigning is kind of what I always knew about it, frankly, that there's a beginning and an end to it. And I really do view it as a foot race, that you pace yourself, but you don't stop. It's an incredible amount of hard work. It takes a lot of energy. And you got to keep your head about yourself. It doesn't do you any good to body slam your opponent. But you try to get a message out and you repeat the message. And it's important to be repetitive and simple. The person who gets up there and tries to redefine the International Monetary Fund's role in world affairs to West Texas farmers is going to get about 30 seconds worth of hearing. And it's important to keep your message simple and repeat it. It's important to be decent and hard work. In terms of the governing side, I've never had that experience yet, so I can't answer. But I liked it. It's a tough life, but there's something exhilarating about it. And when you combine that with the notion of serving people and trying to make the society a better place that you care about, for example, Texas, which I really do care about, then it becomes worthwhile.
Does speaking matter? In other words, when you address a group, and how do you do it?
I'm pretty good at speaking. I mean, am I good or bad at it? Yeah, I think I'm pretty good at it. I give a lot of speeches. I think speaking is a function of knowing your topic and being comfortable as you address it to people, to be relatively calm and be matter of fact with folks, but to make your points and make them well. But that's knowing the speech and knowing the subject you're doing. I'm pretty good at it. I think more as importantly is the capacity to do what you do, which is to look into a TV camera and get a message out, unfortunately, or fortunately, whatever your perspective is. But that's so much of a campaign is the capacity to find the person that never gets to see you in person, and in the short period of time be able to project a image of sincerity and caring and decency.
If you were to get elected to any office, what are your missions? What's your vision as to what
needs
you would
to be
want to
done?
accomplish?
Well, I think in Texas, and let's just focus on Texas, I think there's two different sets of issues. One would be the national issue. One would be the Texas issue. In Texas, the role of the governor, for example, I'm not suggesting that's what I'd run for, but if I were the governor of Texas, I'd be concentrating on education. Over half our budget goes to education. It's one of the real public services we provide for our folks, and we do a lousy job in Texas. So I would have a vision of a more choice-oriented or parental involvement-oriented school system where teachers make a lot of the decisions and where the administrators actually administrate as opposed to decide classroom policy, for example. I think Mexican-Texas relations are going to be vital. I mentioned earlier the notion of free trade. I think we got to make sure we have people in Texas government that understand the sensitivity of dealing with the Mexican government so that the relationship becomes welded together for a long time coming. I think that we run a great risk of taking a treaty and not administering it properly. And I think the Texas officials are going to have a major role in seeing that Texas or United States and Mexican relations work well. In the past, we've had Texas leaders that kind of treat the Mexicans as, you know, people down south and take a very arrogant attitude. And that, I don't care how strong the treaty is that binds, you also have got to have a good people-to-people relationship with your neighbors. I think that the person that's able to do that is going to be a tremendous credit to Texas and the country. And then, of course, there's the issues of highways and prisons. We need more prison beds in Texas. We've got a tremendous overcrowding here at the county level. So those are the issues you'd concentrate on. And I think also just in terms of Texas values, you know, there's nothing wrong with change, but you want to make sure as you do change, some sacred things about Texas's past remain. Hard work, you know, right to work state, limited terms for legislatures. We meet only 4 months out of every 2 years here in this state, which is probably a pretty good way to do things. If you don't let them meet, they're not going to do that much harm to you, type attitude. And on a national level, I think it would be concerned to protect the marketplace would be one of my biggest just kind of general philosophies, because I view the marketplace as the most democratic place for people to exercise their free will. And without a marketplace, you end up with a regulated economy where economic decisions are made by a handful of kind of detached bureaucrats, which is probably the most frightening thing I could think of that could happen to society.
We keep hearing that, and there's a national sense, you hear it from reporters, that the Texas governor doesn't have any power.
Well, that's not true. The Texas governor doesn't have powers relative to certain other states, but the Texas is run by boards and commissions. You got to understand, Texas has a constitution that reacted to the carpetbagging right after the Civil War. And there was a governor appointed down here by the Reconstruction folks that just despised. And so when the normal Texans took government back over, they fashioned a way of government that's tightly controlled by a constitution. So in order to change their government, you actually have to amend a constitution, which is very cumbersome to some. But, and as a result, the governor, there was a real balance of power. But the governor gets to make all the appointments to the boards and commissions that run the state. That's a very powerful role. The governor's got line item veto, something I can assure you that President Bush would love to have these days. And the governor can call a special session. And on the special session, the governor can set the agenda the way, in this case, she wants the agenda set. That's a very powerful tool. Say, for example, you have a group of senators who are anxious to push, migratory bird protection, and that agenda item would be put on the agenda if, for example, they were willing to cooperate on some budgetary matters, and that's a very powerful tool. So the governor can't appoint the judges. The governor can't appoint the attorney general. We elect our attorney general. We elect our lieutenant governor, who some say, and probably is, the most strongest elected official in Texas today. But the governor also has one other item that the other elected officials don't have, and that's the bully pulpit. The governor is the most watched political person in the state. And if that bully pulpit is used properly, the governor can affect change in policy. So maybe weaker in some, but not all that weak.
Why is there such a interest or a simpatico relationship between columnist politicians and baseball?
That's a good question. I can understand the politicians and baseball part. Baseball is America. I mean, if you want to be associated with what's truly American and you're a politician, you better get close to baseball.
Why is it American?
Well, it's America's family sport, for starters. Ours is most other pro sports, particularly the spectator sports, have priced themselves out of the reach of the American family.
What's a ticket cost to go to a Ranger game?
Well, you can a man like you with your salary would have to pay $13, but a family of a single mother with 2 kids under 10 years old can come to our ballpark for $8.
Total?
Total. Now, she has to ride her bicycle because parking is for, but and she can bring her own soft drinks in so long as they're not bottle or can. They're $4 tickets in the outfield, and we got, unfortunately, too many of them right now. We're underutilizing our outfield seats at $4 and at capacity for our $13 seats. And that's why we're building a new stadium, by the way. But baseball is America because it's a family sport. I mean, it truly is. And you come to our park, you see Cub Scouts and Girl Scouts and brownies and kids just running all over our park. And you got grandmothers, and it really is one of our missions in baseball, by the way, is to protect that atmosphere. I mean, what we cannot have happen is drunks and thugs run loose inside our stadium offending people, because then you do lose the capacity to call yourself America's family sport if your stadium is run over by people who have a total disregard for the safety, the I don't mean necessarily physical safety, but just the environmental safety in your park. The other reason why is it's played in a park-like setting. It kind of harkens back to our past, and it's individual accomplishment for the team, individual accomplishment for the overall good, called team. And you look at Nolan Ryan. Nolan Ryan pitches no-hitters, but when he speaks, he says, "I did it for the team." There's nothing more American than that. Entrepreneurship for the good of the country, capitalism for the good of the country, the idea of creating jobs, someone risking capital to go out and create jobs for the other fella. That's what America has been about. I always joke and say, particularly west of the Mississippi, but entrepreneurship and job creation run hand in hand with that individual spirit of accomplishment, and that's what baseball is. You can't hide in piles of bodies or huddles. You're out there all by yourself, and so when the shortstop makes a brilliant play or an error, everybody sees you, and yet it affects the other 24 people on your roster.
But beyond the politician, you see...
oh, the columnists, I forgot.
You got George Will and David Broder,
yeah.
and others spend, they'd rather, based on what you read, they'd rather spend time in the locker room than they would covering sports.
You bet.
I mean, covering politics.
Well, I think that's an interesting aspect of the game. The way I would describe it is it's the only game where you can have George Will sitting next to the postman, and they might be able to get along because they have a common thread, and that is discussing whether or not, I don't even know who George Will's favorite team is, but whoever his favorite team is starting pitching is going to get through the mighty red machine. I think that's one of the wonderful aspects of baseball, is that it can hit you at all dimensions. I can't speak for George Will because I don't follow him that closely, but I think people, for example, and perhaps this is what's captivated him, you get this sense of history in baseball. It's truly the only sport where you can take Nolan Ryan, put him on the 1927 New York Yankees, and he's a player. On the other hand, you can take Babe Ruth, and I think he could make our team. I'm pretty certain he could. And unlike football or basketball, where the size of the people have changed the character of the game, and it's impossible to take a 1927 Brooklyn Yankee or whatever they were called, professional football player, even if they had him in those days, and try to put him on the New York Giants. You just can't do it. So there's a historical sense. There's a sense that the statistical side of baseball is so marvelous because you have a statistical basis in which to compare everybody on. One of the things we have to do in baseball is never let that change, is to keep the rules as constant as possible. And no aluminum bats, for example, because that would totally alter the way baseball could be measured from one era to the next. And perhaps that's what appeals to him. I think the individual nature of the game would appeal to a guy like Will, where he can, as I said, see the individuals accomplish great measure for the... And then it's a game of subtleties. It's not a game of smash-face defenses or bombs. It's a pretty peaceful game that allows your mind to think, by the way, in between moments of action. But it's a game of subtleties. It's hit and runs. It's skillful maneuvering of the field. It's positioning of fielders. And it's some moments of high drama as well.
Let me ask you about the political analogy. As we speak, unfortunately for you, you've just lost 8 games.
Right.
What about the ups and downs of this business? I mean, you've been in politics. You watch that. How do you stay up as the managing director of a baseball team when you've lost 8 straight games?
Well, it's tough. Right before I walked in here, I ate a glass, and no, it's tough. We had won 14 at one point during this season, a while back, and well, we thought we were magic and geniuses, and sure enough, we turned out and had a bad losing streak. I think you play it like you do any. There's 2 aspects of it. One is the personal aspect, and I just think that's seasoning. I have been disappointed before. When we first bought the team, we came roaring out of the gate like at 14-4. Well, I thought I was, Mr. Magic, magic touch, and then lo and behold, we won 7 out of 28 games or something like that. Went into the tank. And
what year was this?
89.
89.
I never recovered. We got a better team now than we did then, and we've had some injuries, and just things didn't go the way we wanted them to go. And it's actually a pretty wonderful life experience to be to pace yourself emotionally, to be patient, something I need to learn, by the way, and not to allow the mood swings to affect your daily life. And unfortunately, my family and the dog cower after a game because that confess sometimes I get grumpy when we lose games we shouldn't lose, but I'm learning better to pace myself. Now the other aspect that's important is how do you deal with the public? Because this is, unlike any other business I can think of, this is a privately held partnership, but the public thinks they own it, and do in a small way. I mean, a piece of those Texas Rangers. And that's what we want. We want people, our fans from all over the state saying, I own a piece of that club. Not only am I going to go see them, but I'm going to root for them and follow them. And so you have to do what I think good politicians do. And this is lessons I learned that I can transfer from the political field to the baseball field. One is talk to your fans. That means you got to have a good relationship with the press. And no matter how ugly the columnists get about us, which they do, that you got to realize that without them we can't talk to the press. I mean, to our fans. We got to have good press relations. And so I work hard to make sure that the people in the press view me as a person that's going to shoot straight with them, but understands that we have a working relationship, that they need me and I need them in order to do what I need to do best, which is to communicate with our fans. And then you lay out the message and the strategy. How does the Texas Rangers intend to compete with a club like the New York Yankees that have got much more money than we do to spend? And that is to build a minor league system, but you put the message out and you say it over and over to Rotary clubs, over and over again to the press people, over and over again to the Lions clubs or the Texas Rangers booster clubs in Tyler, Texas, or wherever it may be. And you got to work hard to get the message out there. Now the feedback is beginning to be, hey, we understand what you're trying to do. We understand budget constraints, and we understand what you're trying to do, and we appreciate your telling us that. Same in a losing streak. You've got to, just for example, last night, I sit with the fans, and I could see, people watching me go down there because is he going to show up during the tough times? He's down there gloating during the good times. Is he going to show up during the tough times? And so, like politics in baseball, there are some symbolic gestures which also make sense. Sometimes in politics they ridicule the gesture as being shallow and symbolic. Well, sometimes symbolism matters, and in this case it was the owner as a fan who has not given up on his club. Also, I was hoping the players would see me there. And when they come out of the dugout, since I'm right there, I encourage them and tell them to go get a hit and don't threaten them and cheer them on, and our front office needs the same encouragement. And so that's how you help buoy the spirits of people during a losing streak.
What have you learned about dealing with the press? What techniques do you use?
Well, I try to use humor. I try to take myself lightly, but also take, particularly the ones who take themselves very seriously, take them lightly as well.
The press taking themselves too seriously?
Yeah, press guys.
Some of them do that?
Oh, no. Well, of course not. No, yeah, they're pretty, there's some fellows out there that are pretty well convinced they understand it all. I would tell you more so in politics and baseball, by the way. I mean, there's some very onerous press people in politics. People are just so heavy and so absolutely convinced they're right, and intense. And baseball, beat writers in baseball, there's two types of writers in baseball. One are the columnists, whose job, got a very tough job, which is to, jump on somebody or praise somebody every day. And the beat writers who have to see 162 games a year. Those fellows get fairly jaded after a period of time, but they're less opinion makers than they are just reporters. And they do a good job, and I deal with them all the time, just little tidbits of information here and there. But it's the columnists and the radio talk show boys that are the ones that can get pretty tough on you, and you just have to deal with them as humans. I mean,
but what doesn't work? I mean, you must have learned some things that.
Well, lying to them doesn't work, or trying to deceive them doesn't work, or not being honest doesn't work. For example.
Do you always talk to them?
Oh yeah, yeah. I don't try to freeze them out. In other words, if they say something I don't like, I think the key is, I mean, the biggest fella here in the marketplace. One of them is a fella named Randy Galloway. He's kind of a character, and he does a good job of getting people to pay attention to him. And he said some things I didn't like.
About you personally or
yeah,
about the team?
That, both. And, I mean, the stupidest decision ever made in the history of baseball, for example, when we, I think, canned our president or whatever it was. And I just said, Randy, look, you can call me anything you want to call me. Just keep calling me, will you? Because I want people to pay attention to the Rangers. And he laughed and I laughed, and I think he understands that I don't take it personally. Now, if he says something he made a mistake one time, in my opinion, and kind of questioned the integrity of somebody in an organization, and I called him on it. And I think if you can just, if the moment arises where you need to castigate a person, you do it in a way that's not public and that is firm but fair. And I think Randy understood he made a mistake on that issue and has backed off subsequently. But it's not going to prevent him from second-guessing the organization or me. But so far, we've been able to keep it off of a personality plane. And that hasn't happened to my father, by the way. Unfortunately, there's a bunch of these kind of, I would call them minor leaguers who view themselves as major league writers who attack George Bush in a personal way.
You wouldn't be talking about George Will, would you?
Yeah, there's one. I sure would. And
those kind of things hurt?
Yeah, not anymore. I don't even read the guy anymore, so I can't tell you if he's been personal or not. But when you read your father being called a lapdog by a person of his stature, I'm not sure I mean large stature or small stature, it bothers you, particularly if you're a feisty Texan, which I am. And yeah, it bothered me. It bothered me for Dad. And but I learned a good lesson from him. And in this case, for example, he just shrugged it off and kind of, you know, attributed it to smallness. And you know, I subsequently found out, and it's probably unfair to say about a fellow like Will, but it's probably for social reasons that he has irked at George Bush. And I don't know. I don't pay attention to it anymore. But my point to you is that if you can keep personality out of this business, you know, and do your job and do it right, and keep name calling out, it matters a lot. So that's a lesson I learned.
Keep up the analogy, though. You remember, excuse me, the wimp charge for your father on Newsweek. Did those kind of things hurt politically? And when you're running a baseball team, if somebody starts to attack you personally, do they hurt attendance? Do they really matter to the bottom line?
No. In baseball, it doesn't really hurt attendance. First of all, it hadn't happened that much in terms of, I mean, there's, you know, stupid decision or stupid philosophy, or, you know, these guys are tight-fisted owners. Not really. I mean, and there was a big, you know, a lot of that movement, a lot of that talk earlier this spring. We've had the best attendance we've ever had, but also the team has played well at one point, not so well recently. But no, now in terms of George Bush, it hurt a little bit. Because instead of this was an announcement day, and Newsweek magazine put that on the cover of their magazine. It's one of the biggest cheap shots in the history of American politics. I don't care what the Newsweek editors say. I'm telling people that this was the biggest cheap shot ever. It's low down, low rent journalism. And it was the day he announced for president, and I can never forget Tom Brokaw, one of these newscasters, holding up Newsweek magazine saying, "Dogged by an image problem, George Bush announces for president." Just because some editors of Newsweek changed the story that a woman named Margaret Warner wrote and put that on the cover. Now, that make me mad? Damn right it did. And but you know, George Bush shrugged it off and went on, and did not affect the outcome of the election. But you just have to learn to live with those kind of cheap shots. And I think you can either, you know, try to smooze, I guess is the Washington D.C. word, those Newsweek people, or just ignore them. And that's what I've personally chosen to do.
How much ownership do you have of the team?
We don't put those figures out, but enough to be a force to be reckoned with. Are
you the ultimate boss?
Two of us are. A fellow named Rose and I. We have two general partners of a 24-man partnership. And a wide variety of folks, I might add. African Americans, women, all sorts of different people in our community, and it's really exciting, by the way, to manage that aspect alone. Just to manage the partnership is a pretty tough road.
How do you split your responsibilities?
Well, we really don't. Well, we do. I shouldn't say that. I handle all the public, all the press, all the speaking, all that nature of the beast. And Rose is really a private business guy who doesn't care for that, frankly. Other than that, we pretty well share all the ultimate decisions. Not pretty well, we do share all the ultimate decisions. We collaborate on baseball matters relating to Major League Baseball. There's a big brouhaha about expansion that took place a while back, and we're all involved with that. Whether or not we got our fair share of the expansion fees, which we didn't think we did. And Rose and I, put our heads together and helped the American League formulate a policy. For example, we handle all the budgetary matters. In other words, we decide what the budget's going to be and then hand it over to our president and our baseball people. But the best thing we do is we pick good people to operate the club and let them operate it. We kind of look at the commander-in-chief as an example. And he puts Jimmy, you don't see him traveling all over the world. He sends his friend and great competent leader Jimmy Baker to do so. And we put our general manager out there and let him run the baseball side. And our president, Tom Schieffer, whose brother Bob, by the way, is in your profession, really has all departments reporting to him, and he reports to Rusty and I. But the good thing about Tom Schieffer is that, one, he's extremely competent, and two, he is a partner with a lot of money in the club. So we all have a vested interest. It's like one of our own running the team, and it's going beautifully.
When you sit here listening to you talk about you have relationships with the press. Sounds just like politics. You have to hire and fire. It sounds like putting a cabinet group together. You have to have a budget, and you just go down the list. There's a tremendous comparison to politics. I wonder if it's more fun running a baseball team than it would be trying to run a state.
Yeah, it is. It would be. I'd like to be running a baseball team when I'm 80, however, and I don't think I'd be running a state when I'm 80. I view this baseball, there's some people have accused us of trying to buy the team and then flipping it, buying it and selling it, which I have no interest in doing. It's really hard to get into baseball. And so people work all their life to make enough money to get into baseball. So why get out? And if I ever do anything, what I would do is, I hope, at least this is my aspiration now, and I readily admit times and things change. But what I'd like to do is to keep my interest in the baseball alive, and if I decide to run for office, go run for office, returning back to baseball, so that baseball would be a part of the safety net concept. The baseball would be there forever, and we'll see.
How often do you catch people dealing with you because you're the president's son? And when you do, what do you do about it?
Well, I can be pretty abrupt.
Does it happen very often?
Not very much anymore. Not really. I think I may have the reputation of being one that can't be fooled easily. I'm pretty accessible, believe it or not, and I don't, the deal guy that comes and says, people are, I just don't give them a chance. It's the person that calls them and says, look, I got a deal that we can work in some, overseas country, and all you need to do is this, and I just forget it. I'm not interested. Thank you. End of conversation. Pretty good about ferreting out who wants the special deal or who wants the inside track somewhere.
Where'd you go to school?
Yale.
Before that?
Andover.
What's that like?
Pretty tough existence for a boy from Texas. It was.
Where is Andover?
Andover is a school in Massachusetts. When I went there, it was an all-male boarding school, and
what years?
Very competitive. 1962 to 64. Extremely competitive place to go to school. I learned how to read and write, and although I wasn't very good at it relative to my classmates, I find that it kept me in good stead relative to the rest of the world. And it's a great education, but tough and kind of cold winters and no girls around, stuff like that. Now it's co-ed now.
Your dad went there?
He went there. One of my brothers went there. Another brother went and exited earlier than expected. And but it's a family deal. I doubt my daughters will go there. I would bet. I'm sure they won't go there.
Why Yale?
I was applied there at University of Texas, and I was all set to go to Texas and got into Yale. There's probably three reasons. One, the family tradition aspect. I can't ignore that. It's been a part of our family, and probably a little bit there. Something like 40 of my classmates went to Yale from Andover, and when I was making my decision, one of my great buddies who still lives in Dallas and was my roommate, or lived in Dallas, now lives in Dallas, and was my roommate for 4 years at Yale, was going. And my point is that other people, friends, were making the decision to go there just as I was making my decision. Texas at the time seemed so far away, University of Texas it is, and that I didn't really know a lot of friends that were going there. It turns out I did, but they weren't around to talk me into going or talk to me about it. And the fact I got in, the dean of the school at one time told me there's no way you can get into Yale, you might as well concentrate on places elsewhere. And I said, fine, I'm applying anyway. and got in. And having made this wonderful bravado statement that I'm fine, I'm going to play anyway, I thought, well, I might as well fulfill. I have no regrets. A couple of my partners in the baseball team were from Yale. I never would have gotten to know them. A guy named Roland Betts from New York. Never would have known Roland Betts had I not gone to Yale. Hans did a pretty good job of tattooing me with the Yale, Harvard. I went to Harvard Business School as well after the military. Pretty good job of tattooing me with that. He's one of them.
How long did you serve in the Navy? Or the service, was it Navy?
Air Guard, Air Force. I actually was trained by the Air Force. I flew F-102 fighters, which was an air-to-air interceptor, single seat, single engine. Airplane had a perfect record of no enemy attacks during my period of time in the Texas Air Guard. I was stationed in Ellington and Houston and served in there for 5.5 years. Enjoyed it. I really loved the flying aspect of it. Although I don't fly now, because I don't practice, or didn't practice, after I got out. And the one thing you learn in the Air Force is be safe or don't fly. And I was a pretty good pilot. Really liked it. Had a lot of fun during that period of time.
Why Harvard?
Well, I was kind of a vocational training exercise. I was in the Guard. I was also working in poverty programs in downtown Houston. And, cynically say there's no money in poverty. And the point was that if you really want to make a difference, why not go make a pretty good living and pump some capital and time back into the causes that you care about. And I do that now. And I'm not a real rich guy, but contribute quite a bit of money through my church and to other organizations directly, as well as my time. And there's the old guy who ran the program first, a great, wonderful man named John White, was the tight end for the Houston Oilers, a great friend of mine. And we were putting young ghetto kids together with athletes to try to provide father figures for these kids to relate to. And White said, you need to get out of here. I told him I was gotten into Harvard Business School. And he said, man, that's a high fancy name school. He said, you better get up there, and if you get out, you come back and make some money. If you want to make a difference, and bring your money back into our community with you. And took his advice, and had a pretty good experience there. I learned, probably more in a different way. This was like Andover, this was kind of learning tools, reading, writing in Andover, and business tools. Doesn't make you a good business person. It just gives you the confidence to get out and in my case, start my own business, which I did in Midland, Texas. I returned to my West Texas roots and started an oil company.
How long did you do that?
Got out there in '75, ran for Congress in '77 and '78, and then merged my company to a company called Harkin, stock for stock, in '86, right before I went to Washington. So I saw a boom and a bust. Learned to make a decision and move quickly. In this case, to merge the company. Knew we had to do something and got out and got it done. Managed people. I think I'm a good manager of people, motivator of people, and learned to do that. Learned that when we merged the company, went out and found everybody a job afterwards, which was important. And really had a wonderful experience in the oil business. Wanted to get rich and didn't. But
in the articles written about you since the election, every one of them, I think, mentions the fact that you quit drinking.
Yeah.
Why do you think people are intrigued by that, and why did you quit?
Well, I quit because at times I thought, I like to drink too much. I'd go from about a 3 to a 10 after a couple of martinis, and my wife and friends would remind me that I was just a 3. So I don't know why people make an issue of that. I think I make an issue out of it if asked, just because I'm proud of the fact that I was a disciplined enough a person to do that.
When did you quit?
85 or 86, I guess, August of '86.
And haven't had a drink since then?
No, and did it on my own. I mean, I'm not a clinical. I don't view myself as any kind of clinical problem. Although I would confess, I looked back on my life and I couldn't remember. I think maybe one year somebody said, well, can you think of any day you hadn't had a beer? And I couldn't. And so I said to myself, well, I think it's probably, why don't we try quitting for a while and see. I had a little help from my wife, who suggested sweetly that perhaps it'd be best if I abstained and actually found it just I can live better without it. I'm a high energy guy. I run a lot. I mean, I love to exercise, and I work hard. I get up early and work hard. And you know, I couldn't have gone to that campaign, for example, as productively as I thought I did. If I was out there, you know, you get in politics and have a few drinks with the boys, and next thing you know, it's 1 in the morning, and then you have to get up and give a speech at 6, and you're off again. And you can't campaign, drink, and exercise. I mean, one of those three has to go, it seemed like to me. And I can't live without exercise, and I needed to campaign. So it worked well there, and I just haven't had any urge to have it since.
Do you think drinking has a negative impact on the society at large?
Yeah, particularly if you drink too much, you bet.
What happens because of it?
Well, I think you have dysfunctional families. I think you have incredible selfishness. I think you have violence. Yeah, I think it's a real problem. Believe me, I'm for moderate drinking. We got a big issue in sports on drinking. You know, we got billboards all over our park. Here's a guy who's saying he doesn't drink, and yeah, we got Budweiser signs or whatever it is all over our park, and we sell beer, a lot of it.
Does it cause a problem at all at the games?
Well, we try to manage it. Some, yeah, it does. I mean, we get people that get drunk out there and get abusive, and so we throw them out. That's the way you manage it in that situation. But we work hard at limiting the time when people can buy beer, and the ushers who control whether a person's allowed to drink a beer. If they're too drunk, they don't buy them. And but I think the interesting thing about the beer advertising business is that it's good to have the beer companies preaching moderation. Who else best to preach it? We can't have a prohibition era again, in my opinion. But what we can have is an era of moderation. And so if you watch the alcohol and beer ads carefully, or the beer ads carefully, you see people saying, drink moderately. Drink, but don't drink a lot. You know, drink for fun, but don't drink to get drunk. If you drink, be careful and don't drive. And I think that's a good message. Who else is going to put that out? The federal government, they'll botch that if they try to do it. So why not have the people with something at stake do it? And that's the beer manufacturers. And so I encourage, and I think it's good to have beer advertising when they preach that message. And so we try to preach at our park. But I don't know why that's an interesting question. Why is it in every article? I'm surprised it is. But
people make comments to you about it?
Nah. I mean, when I don't drink in front of them?
Well, no. I mean, you know, people say, I read the article, I didn't know you didn't drink, and
no.
Congratulations. And,
nah, not really. It's a good thing. I mean, it became an issue in the governor's race here with Ann Richards, and unfortunately, her opponent, a fellow named Maddox, tried to make an issue out of her drinking. She is an alcoholic and recovering alcoholic. And I turned to some friends I'll never forget and said, that's the best thing. That's the best thing that's happened to her, that he did that in the campaign, because it shows strength and discipline and the capacity to whip a problem, which she did. And so I take my hats off to her.
Not too much time left.
Sure.
We came to Dallas to talk about Texas and the individuals from Texas. In the last several years, we've seen a lot of Texans who've had problems.
Yeah.
Jim Wright, John Connolly, John Tower, you can go down the list. Anything about Texas that creates those problems?
Well, I think Texas puts you in the arena. And if you get in the arena, you're going to have some people are going to have problems. And Texans are willing to get in there and mix it up. I think perhaps sometimes the greatness of the man is the capacity to overcome problems. And Texans are competitive, and they're willing to serve. And they're sometimes larger than life. They draw attention to themselves. Sometimes they can't help it. Sometimes that's their style. But it doesn't surprise me that there's a handful of Texans that are exposed because Texans are risk takers. In order to have gain in life, you got to take risk, and we do take risk. A lot of us do.
We've got a camera outside looking at the skyline of Dallas. You can't tell this, but at night there's one building even that's got neon signs around it. Or green,
yeah, green.
Big green.
Used to have dollar signs.
But you see a lot of glass, and when you think of Dallas, you see this modern city.
Right.
When you look at that city, what do you think of?
I think of unfettered imaginations. I think of guts. I think of people who are unrestrained by old traditions, that are willing to build new, people that are kind of reaching for new horizons. I think of Texans are people who think big and act big.
Getting any trouble over this in the last several years?
Yeah. Sure.
Now, why? What do you think the city learned anything, or the state learned anything?
Probably learned it, but probably won't listen to it, because Texans are big thinkers and big risk takers, and the bigger risk, the bigger the reward, and the bigger the risk, the bigger the bust.
Have you changed your thoughts at all?
Yeah, pretty good. I've always been a fairly conservative guy. I mean, I never really took the huge gamble in the oil business. Never borrowed the mega money, and managed my money with little money I had pretty well. So not really. Pretty conservative player. But there's some real estate and oil people around who probably have changed their ways. Just tremendous debt trying to hit the big, massive homer. I hope society has changed its ways. I mean, I hope this concept of leverage for the sake of greed has no longer exists. But you know darn well it won't. I mean, it'll be the next wave of people that hadn't learned their lessons coming along as well.
Should government do anything about it?
No. I think government ought to protect innocent people, depositors, stuff like that. I think government ought to make dadgum sure the next time it starts tinkering with financial institutions, it doesn't set a bunch of rules that set off a cavalier attitude about managing depositors' money, referring to the S&L crisis and the lax government involved there. But I don't think government ought to try to get in the way of an entrepreneur. I think it's a mistake, and I think the government ought not to laugh or cry on success or failure, entrepreneurial failure.
George W. Bush and no Junior.
Correct.
That make you mad when people say Junior?
Not really. That was kind of the tag they put on me. I was known as Junior during the campaign, and I'm probably one of these guys that had about 10 different names. W, George W.
How did you
Junior.
miss the H, by the way, the George H.W. Bush?
Well, it was one of those nice gestures of my old man. He didn't want me to have 5 names, George H.W. Bush Jr. That way I can apply for all sorts of government benefits. Because if you got 5 names, you can't. There's not enough slots. But if you've got 3 or 4, you can. And so he was thinking ahead.
Got about 3 minutes left. Look at your own personal future. Help us. Governorship 94, 98.
Could be. Well,
other things besides baseball?
Well, not right now. Short term would be the 92 presidential election.
Campaign?
You bet. You bet.
What would you like to do differently in 92 than you did in 88?
Live in Texas as opposed to Washington. And do some surrogate work, but not 6 stops a day the way I did it. But I'll be involved with it.
Does that stuff matter?
Surrogate, yeah, you bet. People, it's the way you rally the troops. It doesn't matter to switch the undecided voter. He's not going to, he can't see enough of them to make a difference. But the truth of the matter is, what does matter is to rally the troops in Texas or California, which is going to be a crucial electoral state, or Florida. And we're pretty well positioned there. We got Jeb, my brother, down in Florida, and I'm in Texas. And I'm not suggesting that either of us can deliver our states, but we can be there to do the work, to go to Houston for the rally for the people that are going to man the phone banks, to get on the phone here in Dallas and to coordinate the 20 people necessary to do this or whatever it may be, and the same in California. It does matter, but it's not going to take Joe Smith out there wondering whether or not he needs to vote for whoever, Wilder or whoever's running against George Bush or not. He's going to have to make up his own mind based upon the barrage of information he's had. But it helps with the trenches. And then run the baseball deal and look for other business opportunities. I mean, I just hadn't found yet. I've got some capacity, time and energy-wise, to devote some energy to helping another company, but always keeping my eye on that political ball here in the state, helping the party, which I do whether or not I'm going to run or not. I mean, I just enjoy doing that. I like the involvement and help candidates, and there'll be a whole series of state representative and state senatorial races coming up that some old boy may need me out there in Gainesville, Texas, and off I'll go.
Toughest candidate for your dad to run against in 92?
Can't name it.
Nobody tough?
Not right now. But I'd never underestimate American politics, and the minute you take it for something for granted, you get whipped. But I mean, Albert Gore is not as qualified as Dan Quayle to be president, and Mario Cuomo is a northeastern liberal. The party's tried that for years, and that doesn't work because you got to win California, Texas, and Florida. I mean, I don't think you can do that. Wilder's a total unknown. No one's ever heard of him. Jesse Jackson, I think, scares people too much. I'm not sure who else there is.
Time's up. Thank you.
Yes, sir.